Hi friends, today we're reading chapter 17, Augustus Gloop Goes Up the Pipe. When Mr. Wonka turned round and saw that Augustus Gloop was doing, he called out, "Oh no, please, Augustus, please, I beg you not to do that. My chocolate must never be touched by human hands." "Augustus," called out Mrs. Gloop, "didn't you hear what the man said? Come away from the river at once. This stuff is terrific," said Augustus, taking not the slightest notice of his mother or Mr. Wonka. "Oh boy, I need a bucket to drink it properly." "Augustus," cried Mr. Wonka, hopping up and down and waggling his stick in the air. "You must come away. You are dirtying my chocolate." "Augustus," cried Mrs. Gloop. "Augustus," cried Mr. Gloop, but Augustus was deaf to everything except the call of his enormous stomach. He was now laying full length on the ground, with his head far out over the river, lapping the chocolate up like a dog. "Augustus," shouted Mrs. Gloop, "you'll be giving that nasty cold of yours to a million people all over the country." "Be careful, Augustus," shouted Mr. Gloop. "You're leaning too far out." Mr. Gloop was absolutely right, for suddenly there was a shriek and then a splash, and into the river went Augustus Gloop, and in 1 second he had disappeared under the brown surface. "Save him!" screamed Mrs. Gloop, going white in the face and waving her umbrella about. "He'll drown! He can't swim in a yard! Save him! Save him!" "Good heavens, woman," said Mr. Gloop, "I'm not diving in there. I've got my best suit on." Augustus Gloop's face came up again to the surface, painted with chocolate. "Help! Help!" he yelled out. "Fish me out! Don't just stand there!" Mrs. Gloop screamed at Mr. Gloop. "Do something!" "I am doing something," said Mr. Gloop, who was now taking off his jacket and getting ready to dive into the chocolate. And while he was doing this, the wretched boy was being sucked closer and closer toward the mouth of one of the giant pipes that was dangling down into the river. And then at once, the powerful suction took hold of him completely, and he was pulled under the surface and then into the mouth of the pipe. The crowd on the riverbank waited breathlessly to see where he would come out. "There he goes," somebody shouted, pointing upwards towards, and soon enough, because the pipe was made of glass, Augustus Gloop could be clearly seen shooting up through the pipe head first like a tornado. "Help! Murder! Police!" screamed Mrs. Gloop. "Augustus, come back at once. Where are you going?" "It's a wonder to me," said Mr. Gloop, "how that pipe is big enough for him to go through it." "It isn't big enough," said Charlie Bucket. "Oh dear, look, he's slowing it down." "So he is," said Grandpa Joe. "He's going to get stuck," said Charlie. "I think he is," said Grandpa Joe. "Oh, by golly, he is stuck," said Charlie. "It's his stomach that's done that," said Mr. Gloop. "He's blocked the whole pipe," said Grandpa Joe. "Smash the pipe," said Mrs. Gloop, still waving her umbrella. "Augustus, come out of there at once." The watchers below could see that the chocolate swishing around the boy in the pipe. They could see it building up behind him in a solid mass, pushing against the blockage. The pressure was terrific. Something had to give. And that something was Augustus. Woof! He shot up like a bullet in a barrel in a gun. "He disappeared!" yelled Mrs. Gloop. "Where does that pipe go?" "Quick, call the fire brigade." "Calm down," said Mr. Wonka. "Calm down, my dear lady, calm down. There is no danger whatsoever. Augustus has gone on a little journey, that's all. The most interesting little journey. But he'll come out of it just fine. You wait and see." "How could he possibly come out of it just fine?" snapped Mrs. Gloop. "He'll be made into marshmallows in 5 seconds. "Impossible," said Mr. Wonka. "Unthinkable, inconceivable, absurd. He will never be turned into marshmallows." "And why not, may I ask?" shouted Mrs. Gloop. "Because that pipe doesn't go to the marshmallow room," said Mr. Wonka. "It doesn't go anywhere near it. That pipe, the one Augustus went up, happens to lead directly to the room where I make the most delicious strawberry chocolate-covered fudge." "And he'll be made into strawberry chocolate-covered fudge," shouted Mrs. Gloop. "My poor Augustus. They'll be selling him by the pound all over the country tomorrow." "Quite right," said Mr. Gloop. "I know it's right," said Mrs. Gloop. "It's beyond a joke," said Mr. Gloop. "Mr. Wonka doesn't seem to think so," said Mrs. Gloop. "Just look at him. He's laughing his head off. How dare you laugh when my poor boy's just gone up the pipe, you monster!" she shrieked, pointing her umbrella at Mr. Wonka as though she was going to run through. "You think it's a joke, do you? You think that sucking my boy into your fudge room just like that is one colossal joke? He's perfectly safe," said Mr. Wonka, giggling slightly. "He'll never be chocolate." "He'll be chocolate fudge," said Mrs. Gloop. "Never," said Mr. Wonka. "Of course he will," said Mrs. Gloop. "I wouldn't allow it," said Mr. Wonka. "And why not?" said Mrs. Gloop. "Because it wouldn't taste good," said Mr. Wonka. "Just imagine it. Augustus flavored chocolate-covered Gloop. No one would buy it." "They most certainly would," said Mr. Gloop. "I don't want to talk about that," said Mrs. Gloop. "Nor do I," said Mr. Wonka. "And I do promise you, madame, that your darling boy is perfectly safe. And he's perfectly safe where he is," said Mr. Gloop. "Lead me to him this instant." Mr. Wonka turned around and clicked his fingers sharply. Click, 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 3 times. Immediately an Oompa Loompa appeared, as if from out of nowhere, and stood beside him. The Oompa Loompa bowed and smiled, showing beautiful white teeth. His skin was rosy white, his long hair was golden brown, and on the top of his head He came about the height to Mr. Wonka's knee. He wore the usual deerskin slung under his shoulder. "Now listen to me," said Mr. Wonka, looking down at the tiny man. "I want you to take Mr. and Mrs. Gloop to the fudge room and help them to find their son, Augustus. He's just gone up the pipe." Oompa Loompa took one look at Mrs. Gloop and exploded in peals of laughter. "Oh, do be quiet," said Mr. Wonka. "Control yourself. Pull yourself together. Mrs. Gloop doesn't think it's funny." "You can say that again," said Mrs. Gloop. "Go straight to the fudge room," said Mr. Wonka to the Oompa Loompa, "and when you get there, take a long stick and start poking around inside the big chocolate mixing barrel. I'm almost certain you'll find him in there. But you'd better be sharp. You'll have to hurry. If you leave him in the chocolate mixing barrel too long, he's possibly going to get poured into the fudge boiler, and that would really be a disaster, wouldn't it? My fudge boiler has become quite unedible. Mrs. Gloop let out a shriek of fury. "I'm joking," said Mr. Wonka, giggling madly behind his beard. I don't mean it. Forgive me. I am so sorry. Goodbye, Mrs. Gloop. Goodbye, Mr. Gloop. Goodbye. I'll see you later." And Mr. and Mrs. Gloop and their tiny escort hurried away. The 5 Oompa Loompas on the far side of the river suddenly began hopping and dancing about and beating wildly upon a number of very small drums. "Augustus Gloop," they chanted. "Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop." "Grandpa," said Charlie. "Listen to them, Grandpa. What are they doing?" "Shh," whispered Grandpa Joe. "I think they're going to sing us a song." "I told you they love singing," said Mr. Wonka. "Aren't they delightful? Aren't they charming? But you mustn't believe a word they say. It's all nonsense, every bit of it." "Are the Oompa Loompas really joking?" Grandpa Joe said, asked Charlie. "Of course they're joking," answered Grandpa Joe. "They must be joking. At least, I hope they're joking. Don't you?"